Welcome to Nutrition Capital Network's conference call, Product Positioning in Nutrition and Health and Wellness, bringing your supplements, medical foods, and pharmaceutical drugs to market. My name is Mike Dovefish, and I'm the Executive Director of Nutrition Capital Network. This is our second in a series of conference calls of 2011 intended to assist companies discussing topics that we think would be useful to our broader network. Today's call is co-hosted by Todd Harrison, partner at Venable, Nutrition Capital Network's legal sponsor, and we expect this call to last approximately 60 minutes. On today's call, I will be joined by my colleagues and co-founders of Nutrition Capital Network, Grant Ferrier and Steve Allen, as well as Todd Harrison, partner at Venable. The call this morning is the second in a series of conference calls for 2011. Our first call, Building a Winning Team, was held in February, and we anticipate another 1 to 2 more conference calls for 2011. I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague now, Grant Ferrier, CEO and co-founder.
Thank you, Mike. And today's subject is about the regulatory guidelines between a supplement product, a medical foods product, which is on this chart here in terms of numbers as a still emerging category from a quantification standpoint, but certainly from a legal and regulatory standpoint, it's consolidating or solidifying. And with that, we'll introduce Todd Harrison. Again, we're very fortunate to have Venable LLP as our legal firm's partner at NCN. And I'll introduce Todd, who will go through the material, and his background, of course, is on the slide. So, Todd Harrison.
Good afternoon, everyone, or I guess good morning for those on the West Coast. We're pleased to be able to go through this presentation on medical foods, dietary supplements, and to a certain extent on drugs. You know, over the last year myself, I've had a lot of clients inquire about medical foods because it's a very interesting category. Because it allows companies to actually make dietary management disease claims. So there's a lot of interest in this category. Historically, as people know, they were generally foods that were offered entirely in hospital situations, but we're seeing a growth outside of the hospital situation. Sometimes it's in the doctor's channels from companies marketing directly to physicians. To individuals trying to market it on the internet. So it is very much an emerging category. It's an interesting category, and it has its own unique requirements and its unique challenges. But, you know, if you look at slide 22, the basic definition of a medical food is, and I just lost my slides for a second, I apologize. I'm sorry, that's 19. The basic definition of a medical food is something that's formulated to be consumed or administered entirely under the supervision of a physician. It's intended for a specific dietary management of a disease or condition for which distinctive nutritional requirements based on recognized scientific principles have been established by medical evaluation. In reviewing FDA's pronouncements on this, anywhere back from their ANPR that was withdrawn to their warning letter, their most recent warning letters, the FDA clearly construes medical foods as a very narrow category of product. In warning letters, they have indicated already that they don't believe allergies, arthritis, asthma, cardiovascular disease, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, failure to thrive, prenatal vitamins, autoimmune disorders, and diabetes are not conditions with distinctive nutritional needs. Now, the question is, on all those things, would you be able to go back to the agency to show that there are distinctive nutritional needs? One example I have, and I believe it is true, is diabetes, type 2 diabetes. I think there becomes a time where simple modification to diet alone is not sufficient enough to control type 2 diabetes, but yet there's that window there that you may not require glucophage or any of the other drugs that are available for it, and may very well be by modifying the diet with certain nutrients that you would not normally be able to get at high enough dose levels, may very well have an impact on the disease and the pathology of the disease. So I think there are opportunities there, but it really becomes how good of a dossier do you have put together that would support that conclusion that you are meeting distinctive nutritional needs of that specific patient population. The other category of product that we all know about, and that is a dietary supplement. We're all very familiar that is something that's intended to supplement the diet, which contains one or more of the following dietary ingredients, such as a vitamin, mineral, and herb or other botanical, amino acid, dietary substance to supplement the diet by increasing the total dietary intake. So as we know, they're generally done in pill, capsules, tablet, and liquid form, and we're seeing products that look like dietary supplements now being marketed as medical foods, probably for the sole positioning the product with disease-related claims. What's important for a dietary supplement is it cannot be marketed as a conventional food or sole item of a meal or diet. There's another category of food out there that is not talked about very often, and that's the food for special dietary use. It's a very, very old category. It goes back to the 1938 Act. We don't hear much about it. We don't discuss much about it. Food and drug lawyers tend to ignore it. But it's an interesting area, and when I was a kid, I was more akin to, and I was born in the early 60s, so I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and many of you may remember diabetic foods, diabetic candies. Now they're called sugar-free candies. Arguably, those were products for special dietary use. Infant formulas were really special foods for dietary use. So that's another category of product out there that is an interesting category that would be interesting to explore with the FDA to see where they think the bounds of that category is. We're going to slide number 22 now, and we're going to get into the specific key requirements for medical foods. And the first requirement is a medical food is specially formulated and processed as opposed to naturally occurring food used in its natural state for the partial or exclusive feeding of a patient by oral intake or tube. Again, historically, when you think about this, is that these were products that were generally in liquid form, and they were formulated to be given to people through feeding tubes in hospitals. So that's where the historical perspective comes in. When Congress dropped the medical foods into the Orphan Drug Act, I don't think Congress realized the very large category of products they could have created by that definition. But they did it, and that's where we are. So the first question is this product specially formulated and processed? This would suggest these are like regular food products in shake provisions, maybe in a bar. It calls into question whether a pill would be considered specially formulated or processed. Dietary supplements are a subcategory of food. It is arguable that a dietary supplement or a pill could be considered a medical food if it's appropriate for that particular category. And we go down to number 23, and it's slide number 23. A medical food is intended for the dietary management of a patient who has limited or impaired capacity to ingest, digest, absorb, or metabolize ordinary foodstuffs or certain nutrients because of therapeutic or chronic medical needs. And here again, you have a situation where the patient has a very, very difficult time getting the necessary nutrients, and those nutrients, they may need those nutrients because of the specific disease condition they have. Again, you kind of go with maybe arguably, if you think about it from this perspective, could vitamin B12 be a medical food in pill form for people with dementia who are over the age 65? One thing we know about dementia in some people is that it's caused by the inability of older citizens to be able to process and metabolize B vitamins. It's a question I throw out there. It's an interesting issue, but it would seem to fit that category. Other special medically determined nutrient requirements other specially medically determined nutrient requirements that cannot be addressed through modification of the normal diet alone. Here's where we get into the crux of the issue. And you look at the Canadian Biotech 2006 warning letter on their probiotic products. the psoriasis, the chronic constipation, the arthritis, the Crohn's disease, and colitis and IBS. FDA's position is that none of these diseases do not have distinct nutrient requirements. Putting arthritis and psoriasis aside, I think that the wealth of evidence that is starting to develop around probiotics, for instance, and the benefits of probiotics and the nutritional benefit of probiotics on certain disease states such as Crohn's disease, colitis, and IBS may very well fit very strongly into that category, and it should be something that companies should be willing to explore. But if you're going to do the exploration, you got to figure out, okay, I'm using X type of strain, and I'm going to use this strain. Would people in the scientific community agree with me that this is a strain that is necessary for the dietary management of the disease? And, we can get into the arguments of whether probiotics are really biologics and everything, but really, we don't have as much probiotics in our diet as we did way back when we ate a lot of sauerkraut and yogurt and things, a lot of fermented foods. So it's a place where you can start looking and starting to see where there may very well be something missing in our diet that is very unique. And so I would, if you're going down that road, start looking at the literature very closely and putting together a very strong dossier as to why you would believe, and right now I'm using the example of probiotics because I think it does kind of fit well into this category, as to why it's a distinct nutrient need, and quite frankly, it's really hard to increase your intake of probiotics by simply modifying your diet. Medical foods, go to slide 24. Medical foods also provide nutritional support specifically modified for the management of unique nutrient needs that result from a specific disease or condition as determined by medical evaluation. Again, in this situation is there a very unique nutrient need that disease requires? And the most recent warning letter to Bioenergy in 2007 said there was no distinctive nutrient need for patients with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, or cardiovascular disease. I would argue that let's say cardiovascular disease, that they probably do have distinct nutrient requirements. As we learn more about nutritional medicine and the science continues to outstrip the ability for companies as well as the regulatory agencies to keep up, is it something to look into? Is there, for instance, is a high-dose omega-3 fatty acids, should that be a medical food, or should that be a prescription drug? I would argue that omega-3s are a necessary part of a diet, and it's a necessary part of helping reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, but also managing the disease itself. And from that perspective, maybe it is more appropriate as a dietary management tool rather than as a drug approval process. Especially where you have a lot of literature that points to the benefits of omega-3 fatty acids in the treatment of specific disease of cardiovascular disease. One person may argue that CoQ10 might be something else in cardiovascular disease, especially with those people who have heart failure. There's a lot of evidence out there that's emerged on CoQ10 that it does provide benefit to people with those diseases. It doesn't treat the disease, but it may very well help manage the disease. Maybe individuals who are taking a statin drug, and statin drugs tend to deplete CoQ10 levels, which may very have an issue on mitochondria. Okay, is that more appropriate a dietary supplement claim, or is that more appropriate a dietary management claim? I think these are all things that really need to start being discussed with the agency and to come to a really good, strong position of where we're going with these type of things. We have the Nestle Boost Kids Essential Warning Letter in 2009. Again, FDA's position was no distinctive nutrient need for the medical condition of failure to thrive. But is that true? What type of dossier had Nestle put together? And again, if you've got a strong, I kind of go back, we all have our legal arguments, but it really goes back at really doing your homework, having a very strong scientific dossier that supports your conclusions. Then we go to the efficacy warning letter of 2007, no distinctive nutrient need for individuals suffering allergies or asthma. Well, it is that. I mean, there are nutrients out there that definitely help with bronchial spasm, helps with bringing down inflammation. But again, tying that to asthma and allergies, I think, is what has been missing in these companies' portfolio. It's just extremely important to do so. And then with Metagenics in the 2003 warning letters, it was type 2 diabetes, arthritis, psoriasis, eczema, chronic fatigue, and migraine headaches. Again, I can't really go to whether arthritis or psoriasis has specific nutritional needs. But type 2 diabetes is an area that I think is worth exploring for companies to make a determination of whether they can fit into that category. Chronic fatigue may very well be somewhere in that category. Maybe taking mega doses of B vitamins, and I'm just throwing that out here, I don't know if it's true, or taking a combination of B vitamins and CoQ10 and alpha lipoic acid, maybe the combination into a food would help manage chronic fatigue. But you have to do your homework, and you have to look into the science and see if the science supports it. Now we go to page 25. Medical foods are intended for use under medical supervision. That is probably one of the most key components of this, is that medical foods are indeed for people who have very specific conditions, and they are supposed to be under the management of ongoing physician care. So medical foods are intended only for those patients receiving active and ongoing medical supervision. And so FDA's position historically has been that medical foods should not be a part of mass market. It should be limited to availability through hospitals, through institutional settings, and I don't mean mental institutions, just maybe through senior care, assisted living facilities, or through your physician's office. And while I've been discussing all this, I've been talking about ways of getting to the market. And then on page 27, we start talking about the pathways to market. And the thing about medical foods is that right now, because there's no FDA drug approval process, the barrier to entry is moderate. In fact, one could argue it's low. Somebody could probably slap a medical food on there and slap it up on the internet tomorrow and start marketing it. And unfortunately, it could be the biggest quack job in the world. The FDA may not see it for 3 years because it's a small agency. It's not a reflection on the agency. It's the reflect of the reality we live in today. FDA will require all ingredients to be grass-seed, which really is the kind of standard for drugs, but generally recognized as safe and effective. And generally recognized as safe is modified here because it has to be generally recognized safe, not for the general population, but for the targeted population. So even if an ingredient would be considered GRAS for general use by the general public, FDA may very well take the position it's not GRAS for use in a specific patient population. They make the position that a food additive that has an ingredient that has a food additive approval may not be appropriate or GRAS for use in a medical food. And that's a very important distinction. So you've got to make sure you're doing your safety and evaluating the safety and making sure that ingredient truly is GRAS for generally recognized as safe for that particular patient population. On the efficacy side, the minimum standard would be the significant scientific agreement standard that pretty much is what it is for an unqualified health claim, which basically is that there's scientific consensus that this product, number one, is effective in managing the person's disease, and that there's a unique need for that nutrient. Now, that's the minimum standard. FDA in its ANPR back in the 1990s for medical foods, which is withdrawn, but has not really withdrawn the basic tenets of that ANPR, said that the level of efficacy required is somewhere between the significant scientific agreement standard and a new drug approval process. So when I say significant scientific agreement, that to me is, for medical, that's the low barrier. That's the low point. And that's why I would say that the barrier to entry should be moderate. Not quite as high as a drug, but not as low as a dietary supplement. Because FDA has a limited view, the distribution channels are very limited in their mind. It should not be mass marketing. You should not have it in the cereal aisle at giant food stores or at Tom Thumb Page. I imagine if you ask the agency and push it, they would probably say a medical food should be behind the counter at the pharmacy and not even over the counter at the pharmacy. So I think that they really do have a narrow view. Importing without prior importation is an issue. In advising clients and discussing these issues, I've had a lot of foreign companies ask me about importing their product in as medical food. And this is what I tell them. If you want to import a medical food, you need to go to FDA and consult with them. I think that you need to do that. You need to do that up front because it's much easier to stop a product at the border than it is once the product is in the United States. And, a product that comes in as a medical food that is in a pill form, for instance, I would imagine would get flagged rather quickly at customs, and it would be jumped up to headquarters pretty fast at FDA. So if you're really contemplating a medical food for importation, I would really recommend very strongly that you go to the agency to discuss this. I think even domestically it's a good idea to go into the agency and discuss why you believe it is possible to market as medical food, understanding that the general reaction from the agency may be we disagree with you, and you'll have to make a decision at that point. As we discussed, I'm not convinced that FDA necessarily believes a pill is an appropriate delivery vehicle. I think they may have issues with that, but it is, if you can put a good scientific dossier, it might be a argument you can win. And on slide 28, we go into unique nutritional need requirement, and we discuss here the scientific dossier must be developed to demonstrate that specific disease or medical condition has unique nutritional needs that cannot be otherwise met through simple modifications to the diet. And you better be able to hit significant scientific agreement. You better be able to show there's consensus within the medical industry or within the industry of, not the medical industry, but within experts in that area, whether it be cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes. You want to make sure that the experts in that area would agree with you that this is an appropriate medical food. It would not hurt to do a GRAS panel, a GRAS-E panel, where you'd get very well what we call a group of famous doctors to come together and come to that agreement. All these things that if you put these type of dossiers together strengthens your position that it's validly being marketed as a medical food. But
Todd, this is Grant.
Sure.
Let me interject one question. You can perhaps draw a breath too. Or
sure. Okay.
The SSA, as you're characterizing, and you've been clear about the building the strength of your scientific dossier, and assuming the SSAs you've characterized, this is mostly preclinical studies. This is mostly animal studies or tissue studies.
No, this would be.
Or is it real? Is it have to be clinical studies?
It would have to be clinical studies as well. I mean, when you look at specific scientific agreement and you kind of look at FDA's health claims, unqualified health claims, it would require safety data as well as preclinical as well as clinical data. We can get into the issue of whether you have to actually do a study on your product. I would argue that you better have done a study on your product to satisfy FDA and the FTC, because the FTC will have advertising. But let's say the literature is just so strong, omega-3 fatty acids. That might be one area where you wouldn't necessarily need a study on your particular omega-3 product, because the literature is so strong that you can rely on that literature alone. That may not, but for Alzheimer's, I don't think you may not have that ability. Or for Parkinson's disease, you may not have that ability. You may not have that ability for MS. So that may very well be disease specific.
Okay, so there's no non-clinical pathway to achieve the scientific.
There is no you're going to have clinical studies to support. Whether you're relying on third-party literature, which is a supplement term, whether you're relying on third-party literature or you are marketing your product. The problem with third-party literature in this case is I think you just have a really hard time with certain things. For instance, there is some literature on probiotics specific, but we now know that it's not only just the family species, it's down to strains, and strains within the species and the families have different effects. So I think you're going to have to be able to show that it's that specific strain for a probiotic that has that medical, that has that benefit. And the only way I think you can really do that is through studies on that particular strain. What you cannot do, and you cannot use the medical food, is to circumvent the new drug approval process. You know, the FDA has a drug approval process. They have one for botanicals. It is not an easy road. It's a difficult road. You have issues of showing characterizations of the material and everything, but you cannot simply go out and do a small study and say this is a medical food. That's not what the purpose of this specific category of food is. You have to do your homework. We already talked about, the next slide is 29, and we talked about the safety. Medical foods, like conventional foods, must contain all ingredients that are either GRAS for use in the food or approved additive. We've discussed this already, so I kind of mixed that in with the prior. But again, I want to emphasize, it's got to be recognized among qualified experts as having been adequately shown to be safe under the conditions or intended use. That may require at least one safety study in the intended patient population on the finished product. Again, it really depends how robust the material is and how generally recognized as safe that ingredient or the ingredients or that formulation is in the science that's already available. Again, we go back to effectiveness. It has to be, FDA would require significant scientific agreement to establish the effectiveness of a medical food. Something that's very good from this ANPR that was withdrawn. It is essential that claims made for such product present an accurate interpretation of the scientific evidence concerning the use of that product or specific formulation. A strong standard substantiation would be one that requires that all pertinent data be considered in the formulation of the product and in development of any claims about its use. This is a pretty strong statement, and I don't think FDA, even though this, again, is an ANPR that has been withdrawn, I don't think FDA's thinking has been changed, and I would venture to say that the FTC would probably agree with that. And as many of us know, sometimes the more difficult agency to deal with is the FTC than the FDA, because the FDA is generally a warning letter. You have time to correct yourself. The FTC, if they send you an access letter, it's going to be much more difficult. The thing about marketing claims for medical foods is that you get to say that claims can be related to the dietary management of the disease. Similarly, this product is intended for the dietary management of individuals with type 2 diabetes. The marketing channels. The Orphan Drug Act does not restrict the marketing channel. FDA has made it clear, hospitals, pharmacies, and physicians. FDA does not believe the product should be mass marketed. Of course, we have two examples we have of potential medical foods. I don't know how Abbott or the other company that does Boost characterizes their product. To me, is it a medical food, is it a food for special dietary use, or is it a hybrid of the two? What I would say is that glucerna and glucose control are essential to people who are diabetics. It provides them with good information. These are legitimately marketed products for the dietary management. The question really is this a medical food? Is this a food for special dietary use? I tend to think that's more a food for special dietary use because it's meeting the needs of that specific patient population. And neither the FDA or the FTC should do anything to try to restrict these type of products that have definitely been developed that are helpful for people with type 2 diabetes, because type 2 diabetes really is as much a dietary management issue, and whether you want to say it's a medical food or or special dietary use, these are legitimate food products. And I think that it is a category of food that should be explored by other companies that are out there, and I think it's a legitimate area. The question of what category it ends up falling in, well, that's a different question, but I don't think there should be any action ever taken against these products because they offer legitimate alternatives for type 2 diabetics. Other examples of medical foods presently marketed, there's Axana, a prescription medical food that is marketed for the dietary management of Alzheimer's. It is cast as a different way of getting the necessary sugar to the brain for people who have Alzheimer's. There's Glycemics 360, which is marketed for the dietary management of diabetes. You have VSL number 3, a probiotic medical food marketed for the treatment of IBS and ulcerative colitis. And then you have Limbrel 500, a medical food marketed for the treatment of osteoarthritis. My disclaimer, I have no idea whether these people have been talking to the agency or not. I don't have an opinion one way or the other than to say that if you're going down some of these non-conventional disease routes, that you should have a very strong scientific dossier to be able to substantiate the use as a medical food. Dietary supplements, core concepts. Now, we're going to switch gears a little bit just to kind of contrast between a dietary supplement and medical foods. It's a lower safety standard. A supplement can't present a significant unreasonable risk of harm, and then with a new dietary ingredient, there has to be adequate information to provide assurance that it does not present a significant or unreasonable risk of illness or injury. We all in this industry await FDA's guidance document on new dietary ingredients. We just hope it doesn't come out on July 3rd before a long weekend so we can enjoy our weekend with our family. A new dietary ingredient is an ingredient that was not marketed in the United States before October 15th, 1994, and does not include any dietary which was marketed in the United States before October. Did that twice. Anyway, we all know the basic definition of new dietary ingredients. What's going to be interesting about NDIs is where FDA, I have a bunch of questions posed here. I'm going to move on because we're starting getting short on time and I'm rambling on here. Dietary supplements can make health claims, qualified health claims, nutrient content claims, and structure function claims. That makes a big difference between that and a medical food. Structure function claims are not as strong as a claim for dietary management of disease. For some companies, one regulatory strategy could be is this: that you put together a really strong dossier of why you meet a unique dietary need and why this product is helpful in the dietary management. And the agency just still disagrees on the one concept that there's no unique dietary need here. And you can't convince the agency. One option you would have, especially if it's in pill form, is to convert that product into a dietary supplement and make structure function claims. They're much weaker, but if you're going forward, there is always a fallback position with the FDA. With the FDA, if they don't believe that you've appropriately categorized the product. Every supplement company has to notify the FDA of their structure function claims. Probably only about 15% of the industry does that. You don't have to do that for the medical foods. You're just out there and you're marketing. So again, in that sense, it's easier to get to market. FDA requires the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act requires a disclaimer. Don't need a disclaimer for a medical food. It's not required. You just have to say it has to be taken under the supervision of a physician. Claim substantiation. Here, though, is a little different. You can clearly rely on third-party literature. And the FTC, aside with their recent consent decrees on very aggressive, and I repeat, aggressive performance claims in which they tied those companies moving forward to a different standard, and those companies have now contractually agreed with the agency, with the commission. That is not the standard. The standard still is the totality of scientific evidence. There's nothing that doesn't make you be able to rely on third-party literature. With that said, if you're making very strong performance claims and you can't substantiate it, I could almost guarantee you these days the FTC will not settle with you unless you agree to the IOVA and Nestle standard that they've put out in those consent decrees, and in fact on all consent decrees that are going forward oftentimes. Okay, we're going to slide 42 and 43 for the remainder. This is basically the pros and cons of marketing your product as a drug, medical food, or dietary supplement. And we kind of talked about this off and on here. But when you look at the slide 43 is basically just kind of giving you a picture of your product. If you're for the dietary management of disease, you're a medical food. If you're intended to supplement a diet, you're a dietary supplement. If you're intended to diagnose, cure, mitigate, or treat a disease or a condition, you're a drug. So that pretty much is kind of a nice little chart, that kind of nice little, I guess, paradigm there that kind of sets out what you're looking, what it looks like. Drug pros. The pros of marketing drugs that have gone through the FDA's approval process that, look, you get a botanical drug, you make express disease claim. Exclusivity during the initial marketing phases, most likely. Higher price point. Prescription drugs covered by insurance plans, a good. Third-party payers, a good thing. Reimbursement under Medicaid and Medicare. So there are a lot of pros to marketing a product as a drug. There's a lot of downsides, especially with natural products. There's an extensive amount of R&D time. The drug approval process takes years. Costs will most likely be in the tens of millions, if not higher. There's no guarantee of approval, and you have significant regulatory oversight. So those are the cons of going down the drug route for a natural ingredient or something that may more appropriately be for the dietary management of a disease. Medical foods, the pros of marketing product as a medical food, lower barrier to market entry, which also is also a negative. FDA pre-market approval not required. Express disease management claims, less costly to manufacture, less regulatory oversight. How FDA objects may be able, if FDA objects, may be able to rebrand as a dietary supplement or conventional food with appropriate structural function claims. So from that perspective, it is going to be a much cheaper process overall than marketing it as a going down the drug route. The cons of marketing is that I believe there's an extensive amount of R&D time. It requires at least significant scientific agreement. Clinical studies can be costly. A good clinical study is going to cost you in the six figures. If somebody says they can come and do a clinical study for less than $50,000, be highly skeptical of that, because every one that I've seen that's been less than $50,000 has huge holes in it. And do these studies in the United States. Don't do these studies in a third world country that patient population is not similar to the United States. So while you have a lower barrier of entry, there is still a lot of work that has to be done that goes into it. You can't just simply look at the literature and say today, I'm going to market that as a medical food. It's just not what the medical food was intended to be. And ultimately, FDA may disagree that the product is appropriately marketed as a medical food. And at that point, you'll have to make a decision of whether you want to fight the agency over it or whether you're going to rebrand your product. And there's always the chance that FDA could take the position that you can't rebrand the product. And then that is that the product is now so associated with a specific disease condition that nothing you can do is going to be able to allow you to cure that, and you'd have to actually probably rebrand your product completely. That's something that I throw out there. I'm not saying that's what the agency would do, but it is a consideration.
Is there any scope or precedent for reimbursement or third-party coverage of medical foods?
Medical foods, Medicare does not reimburse medical foods except those in the hospital setting. So if you're just getting this through your physician's office, it is very difficult to get it reimbursed. But there is some limited ability for, we just looked at this for a client. That's why I know this. And our healthcare people had to actually look at this issue. There's some limited ability, and there are some medical plans that also, some private insurers that will reimburse certain medical foods. Health savings accounts and those things, you may be able to use money out of those to be able to pay for your medical foods.
So hospitals, yes, some precedent, but limited, but not nursing home or institutional.
Well, nursing homes might be. I mean, I think the institutional, there's probably more likelihood of Medicare, but it's a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so that
you have to look at it very closely. But if you were just marketing, let's say, diabetes, and let's say, I'm not saying, I know Abbott's on the phone, I'm not saying Glucerna is a medical food, but let's say, actually in the hospital setting it is, but let's just say the cereal, and let's say it is a medical food. Medicare wouldn't reimburse Glucerna, the cereal that's available in the supermarket. So it really is a very specific analysis. You have to look at the product, but there is some potential that it could be reimbursed, yes. Dietary supplement, the pros are it has the lowest barrier of entry. Anybody can these days fill up a dietary supplement and market it. No FDA pre-market approval required. NDI is a notification process. It's a notification, not an approval process. Interesting issue whether FDA can deny a notification. My position is that the law says you need to notify. There's nothing in the law that allows FDA to say deny the filing of notification. It would be a very interesting case to litigate. I'm not sure anybody wants to litigate. I'd like to litigate it because I think I'd win that argument. FDA doesn't. It's a notification. Once you notify, then your product is not per se adulterated under the Act. And that's really what the notification provision was for, is that if you don't notify on NDI, you're not, you are per se adulterated. Once you do the notification, you're not. But that's, again, larger discussion, and it'll be even of greater interest after the guidance document comes out. There's no restrictions on marketing channels. You can pretty much market it anywhere. The doctor channel is becoming very popular as physicians feel squeezed by insurance and Medicare and everything, and they continue to feel squeezed. They are now reaching out and trying to figure out ways of getting their income up. And a lot of physicians who believe in nutritional supplements will start selling these products through their offices. It raises an interesting question whether if a physician, let's say, take a glucosamine product and gave it to a patient who they just diagnosed with osteoarthritis and say, take this for your arthritis, could FDA actually sit there and object to that? Or is that the practice of medicine? It's an interesting issue. U.S. consumers understand the implied meaning of structure function claims. I think that they're used to now, we're now 18 years into, or is it 17 years into DSHEA. I think they understand the language. Unfortunately, the law is what the law is. I've always been a bit of an advocate that the way the law was drafted sometimes makes claims inherently misleading, but it is what the law requires, so you have to do what you have to do. They're less costly to manufacture. There's less regulatory oversight. It's pretty much, unless you're importing your product, supplements just have an extremely easy time of it. The cons of marketing an ingredient as a food or dietary supplement is that you're limited to structure function claims or FDA-permitted health claims. Generally not covered by insurance. Generally no barriers to entry by competitors. So again, you have that opposite effect as well. And I think that concludes my presentation.
Thanks, Todd. Okay, let's take a few questions now by email. Todd, so some companies are marketing prescription-only medical foods. Are medical foods classified as prescription or non-prescription?
Well, all medical foods are technically non-prescription because they just have to be taken under the medical under the medical supervision of a physician. So technically they can be non-prescription. I think what they're trying to do, and makes sense, is that they're trying to restrict the channel. They're trying to telegraph to the agency that these are not generally available to the general food supply, and that to the general public. I think that goes back to I don't know if people remember the Cook bar from the 1990s, but it was an L-arginine product for cardiovascular disease. They also made structure function claims, and they were available at the aisle in the drugstore or at the grocery store, and FDA says that was inappropriate. So I think that they call it a prescription to make it clear that this has to be taken with your doctor's understanding. I think that's the whole idea behind it. The real key is it has to be taken under the medical supervision of a physician. The prescription, they're using it as a tool to reinforce that, and this is my assumption, is to reinforce that it's a medical food. And I think that's what they're trying to do.
Okay, we have another one here. It's a twofold question. By simple modification of the diet, does that include existing dietary supplement products? And could a medical food and dietary supplement both contain the same active ingredient?
I could see the FDA taking that position that if you could simply take go back to the omega-3 fatty pill, that maybe just taking more fish oil because it's easy to get, that's a simple modification. I think that the agency could take that position. Supplements should be considered part of the diet anyway. However, when you start megadosing on dietary supplements, I would take the position that that's not a simple modification. I think there's a bit of a gray area there. As to the second area, I think that things can.
So Todd, that's a dosage issue.
I think it's a dosage issue, correct. I think
okay.
It is purely a dosage issue. I think that a dietary supplement can be a medical food. I think it can be a drug. I think it can be all three at the same time. And I'll throw out there omega-3 fatty acids. I think I could have an appropriate dietary supplement. I can have an appropriate omega-3 fatty acid medical food, and I think I could have it. And as we know, we have a drug approval for it. So I think that is potentially a substance that could definitely fit all three categories and be marketed in all three categories. With one caution, they should be branded differently. They should not refer to each other's literature, et cetera. So if you're a company and you are looking to market in both channels, I think one channel is marketed one way, the other channel is the other way, and the brands are different names.
Right, okay. One more question by email. We have a lot of them, but we'll go back to see if anyone's called in. Okay. What is the current interpretation of under medical supervision? Does this necessarily mean a physician with prescription authority, or would this include other licensed healthcare providers such as nutritionists, dietitians, chiropractic doctors, etc.?
I would not say nutritionists would be included under medical supervision. I think medical supervision would be osteopaths. I would argue that they'd be naturopaths. I believe they could also be conventional doctors as well as chiropractors. All those are state board. I think the way you look at it is what the state boards allow and what those state boards allow those individuals to do. I think it's pushing it to say that an RD or a nutritionist is medical supervision.
Okay. Moderator, do we have anyone queued up?
Yes, we do have a few guests in the queue. First, we have Bernard. Your line is open.
A couple of questions. One is there an easy way to get access to safety dossiers that have been already submitted for guidance? And two, regarding the significant scientific agreement, if a company is developing a new ingredient that's being tested for the first time, and really you're going to be the only party generating studies on this ingredient, do you stand a reasonable chance that experts in the field will positively that there's scientific agreement on such an ingredient?
To the first question, I don't know of any scientific dossiers that have been submitted to FDA. You can always do a FOIA request. If that information is provided to FDA on a confidential basis, you may very well get back a document that's extremely redacted. So that's difficult to understand. I don't know the answer to the question whether there is anything. With the agency, you would do a FOIA request, and if it is releasable, they will release it. But I have a sneaking suspicion to the extent that some companies have gone in and talked to FDA about this and submitted data and everything, that you would get back a document that was heavily redacted, and rightfully so. I mean, because a lot of that would be a lot of proprietary trade work. As to a new dietary ingredient, a new ingredient altogether that is being developed, I think if you have the problem you're going to face is that you're going to have to do an IND. Period. I mean, you're not going to be able to do a study in the United States without an IND for the dietary management of any disease. There's not one reputable CRO or one reputable university that would do it without an IND from FDA. So, by nature, you're already starting down that drug route.
Although, just to be clear, I didn't mean a chemically modified new substance, but rather a natural substance that may have not been researched before or put into foods.
Sure, but you're still a natural substance that is not, you're still talking about something that's new and not been used it's been used as food or as a dietary supplement. I think the agencies, I think the answer is going to be pretty clear. They would take the position that you have a drug at that point, and they would probably want you're going to have to do an IND, even if you could ultimately get down that dietary management pathway and not have to go through a full-blown NDA. You're going to still be doing an IND with the agency to do clinical testing, even for the dietary management of a disease. But let's say it's a natural substance that is found in food, and let's say it is something that the safety is well known, it's been extremely well studied, and everything. But it's never been tested for the dietary management of the disease, and you go ahead and you do that study on dietary management of the disease. You know it's safe, and yes, I think that if you have robust enough studies, I think you could get an all-star panel together that would agree that this indeed there's scientific consensus that this ingredient does what it says it does. But I think you'd have to have good, robust studies. I don't think one study is going to be sufficient. I don't think that. I think that when you look at what Kellogg did with psyllium husk, and is it General Mills? I think General Mills did it with Quaker Oats. For a health claim, they did a lot of heavy studies to get those health claims, and they were multi-centered studies. So I don't think it is an easy process.
Okay, is the moderator there?
Okay, our next question does come from Ben. Your line is open.
Oh, hi. I think my question has been answered already, and I was trying to ask to see whether one can market the product in different channels, as medical food and supplement.
Yeah, there's to me no doubt there are different claims. There's no reason that if something's not grass for use in food, that's not appropriate for dietary supplement use, as well as potentially if somebody wants to go get a drug approval for a natural ingredient, they can do that. It does not make it does not keep you from marketing your product as a supplement or as a medical food. That's a marketing choice.
And I think, Todd, you implied one could use a foods for special dietary use, that old designation, to sell.
Yeah, that's I suppose food for special dietary use intrigues me a lot. It's not something that I have looked at in a long, long time. The last time I looked at it was like in 1997 for a client. It just doesn't come up. But, in preparing for this and looking at the products that were at the supermarket on the cereals for diabetics, it got me thinking, and those, especially for the diabetic population, I think food for special dietary use is an avenue that should be explored.
Next, we do have Jay. Your line is now open.
Thank you. Hi, Todd. I want to ask you, if there were 3 common dietary ingredients that, through their unique combination, provides a special delivery into the system of one of them, and that's the purpose of the product. would you recommend submitting notification of a new dietary ingredient for the benefits that kind of notification provides, or are there some potential downsides to doing that?
So it's 3 dietary ingredients, correct, that are old dietary ingredients?
Correct.
And for some reason, one potentiates the other?
Right.
Well, there's no reason. That's not an NDI. That's not a new dietary ingredient. Unless they're chemically forming a whole new molecule, that's not a new dietary ingredient. So there's no reason to do a notification. However, I'd make sure that I'm comfortable with the safety that I've done safety studies on it, at least pre-clinicals, to make sure that there aren't safety issues with that. I mean, dietary supplements, for good and bad or whatever, there's always 10 different ingredients, it seems like sometimes, in some of these formulations. And there's nothing inherently bad about that. It doesn't require you to do a notification unless you somehow, in the combining of that, have created a whole new molecule that none of us has ever seen before.
Okay, it's a gray area. We have a patent on the combination, and yet that's not to say it's never existed in food and water products.
Yeah, I mean, the combination's fine, having a patent of the combination, but unless you're telling me that they are truly a new molecule, that they somehow have combined and created truly a new ingredient, because there's bonds and chemical bonds and everything that now exist that would not normally exist, then I don't see the basis for it to file a new dietary ingredient. And I would recommend against a new dietary ingredient notification because it's not appropriate. It's not the appropriate avenue. With that said, I would definitely make sure that I'm comfortable with the safety of the product. Because when you know that something potentiates something else, you need to make sure that in potentiating it, or the synergy that exists is safe. We always should have appropriate warnings and everything on all labels of all products, including dietary supplements. For instance, if you have a blood sugar product that is to help maintain normal blood sugar levels, and it's appropriately marketed as a dietary supplement, but if you have ingredients in there that could cause the blood sugar to drop, there should be a warning on the label regarding that those people who are taking hypoglycemic agents should not take this product.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Let me thank Todd too again. Thank you, Todd. I know this is the tip of the iceberg of what you know about these topics, so it was very generous of you to share this time. And again, if you have follow-up questions, Mike will send you Todd's direct contact, so he can you have his information in the file as well. So.
I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great.
Thanks again, Todd.
Why don't we conclude here? I have several, I think over 20 questions by email, and we will be getting back to you with some answers from Todd, and they'll either be posted on the website or we'll be emailing you back with answers to those questions. Is there any other input from Steve or Grant before we sign off?
No, just a thank you on my behalf to everybody who's participated this morning, and as you say, we'll be back in touch with responses to questions we didn't get to.
Great. And I just want to remind everybody that our next event will be at SupplySide West in Las Vegas, where we'll be having 10 to 12 ingredient companies presenting, and NCN 9 in Los Angeles, November 14th and 15th. So thank you, everyone, again, for joining us on the call, and again, a very special thanks to Todd Harrison of Venable.